Perfect. I think that's everybody. A few of you are still connecting to audio, but I will kick off. So hello, welcome, happy Wednesday. I'm Anna. I am the Cooperative Party's Policy Officer for those of you who haven't joined us on a Wednesday before, but also a big welcome back to lots of familiar faces. I feel like, if nothing else, the pandemic has been a real opportunity to get to know lots of members better on these Wednesday lunchtime chats. This week we are talking about alternative financial services, and in particular we're going to be talking about credit unions and the role that democratic member-owned organisations can play in creating a fairer financial sector. And it corresponds, as always, with the publication of a new chapter of our Owning the Future report, which looks at credit unions but also building societies, regional banking models, universal standards of access, and how we protect access to ATMs and branches so that we don't end up with a cashless society that leaves too many people behind. Before we start, I'm just going to do a tiny bit of housekeeping, and apologies if you've heard my spiel before. First is just to make sure everybody's aware that we record these sessions. Those of you with videos on, the chances are you won't show up on the recording unless you speak and ask a question, but if you don't want to be filmed, then please turn off your camera. Equally, if you're dressed indecently, turn off your camera too, that would be great. You'll see instead of the usual bee that Izzy, my colleague, hides behind, we have the fabulous Joel helping us today as Izzy's off this week, so any issues you can message Joel in the chat. If you want to ask a question, then we would welcome that at the end. You can use the chat function in order to ask questions. You can also use the participate button to put your hand up. There's a reactions button to do thumbs up and claps if you would like to express how you feel about someone's comment or contribution. And if all of those fail, you can email mail@party.coop, and that goes straight through to Joel, and he'll be able to let me know of any questions you've got. So I think that's my run through, and all that is left is to introduce our excellent speakers. We are blessed with a huge number of speakers today, so I've asked speakers to keep their presentations fairly short, so if they don't cover everything you're hoping to hear about, make sure you ask it in your question afterwards. We have got Lauren Langton, who is dialing in from Northumberland. She's the CEO of the Northumberland Community Bank. We have Ben West, who some party stalwarts will recognise from our Communications and Digital Officer, who is now Head of Business Development at the London Mutual Credit Union. We have Joe Moscrop dialing in from Manchester from the #1 CopperPot Credit Union, and we have Karen Hurst, who joins us from Glasgow, who works for ABCUL. She's their policy officer, and ABCUL represents and is the membership body for credit unions in the UK, but not Northern Ireland, I'm told, so we'll have to wait another day to hear about Northern Irish credit unions. There's a strong tradition there too. So credit unions, for those of you who aren't a member, and I recommend that your first action after this call is to find your local credit union and join it. Credit unions are a mutual form of finance. They are owned by their members, they are democratic, and they provide affordable and fair financial services, whether you are struggling to access traditional banking services, or really for anybody who is after a good quality product and feel like they're contributing to a fairer system which isn't dominated by big four profit-making high street banks. So it's really exciting to hear about what cooperation in practice looks like. So I think I'm going to hand first over to Lauren. I'll share a slide that Lauren has put up, and then we'll get on to our other speakers and I'll introduce them as we go. We'll take questions at the end, so hold on to them, or if you're worried you're going to forget it, pop it in the chat. Right, Lauren, if you've unmuted yourself, yeah. I will share your presentation.
Thanks very much. Everyone needs to know it's only one slide.
Yes, yeah.
And even that's going to come and go, isn't it, Anna? As we've arranged.
Yes, you don't have to miss out on seeing Lauren's face for too long, so that is a good thing.
Thanks very much. Shall I just start talking, Anna, and then we can get on with it?
Yes, perfect. So, kick off.
Brilliant. Yeah, Lauren Langton, CEO of Northumberland Community Bank. I've got a short overview really of just what the community bank is and what we're doing, the impact of COVID-19 and adapting to the marketplace that we're now in. Building financial resilience is my second theme, and then ways that that you as a cooperative party member might be able to support our sector, which Anna really has stolen my thunder, because the easiest way is just to join us, but nevertheless, let's so that's really the three things I'm going to talk about. If I can just go back to Northumberland Community Bank. So we actually started trading in April 17 when two credit unions came together. Back then we had several hundred members, but many of them were inactive, and we now have 2,500 active members. We offer savings, whether it's regular savings or ad hoc money coming in, and we offer loans between £300 and £15,000. So the savings or deposits have grown since we took over in 2017 from a pot of 324,000 up to 648,000 as at the end of December, which is our financial year. And we had a loan book of 253,000 back in 2017, and we had 548,000 at the end of December. Our members range from depositors who will never need to borrow money through to people on the lowest of incomes. So NCB for short, because Northumberland Community Bank is quite a mouthful. It's small in terms of size currently, but I can assure you we are enormous in terms of vision. So what's been happening since COVID has hit us? Well, certainly leading up to the shutdown, fortunately, we'd completed a disaster recovery plan. And because we were on a sort of planned journey of technology and digitalisation, we were able to continue offering our service to members. We only have the one office as such, and that's in Ashington in the southeast of Northumberland. But new members can join us to save or apply for a new loan online via the website or a smartphone, and existing members can access their account and make changes 24/7. And that was really all because of that digitalisation that we'd gone down. Unfortunately, like everyone else, the volunteers had to more or less drop off on day one. But we were able to continue, and I think really the COVID situation has proved to us all that we need to think very differently about what and how we offer our services. We need innovative products because we really need to respond to our members and the members' circumstances and what's been going on. So, for example, you know, we hear a lot in the news about, oh, the banks and the building societies have been, you know, giving payment holidays and forbearance, and how good of them. And, you know, people need to revisit their budgets and look at loan repayments. Well, do you know, that's what we do all the time. We change with people's circumstances, cuts in hours, a member of the family losing a job or whatever. That's something that we do day in, day out. So that, as far as we were concerned, is business as usual. Granted, it's a little bit more, you know, in numbers, but that's the way we work. We found that people need small loans quickly. The high street banks do not do that. And as a sector, another thing that we've really come to realise in this COVID, that we need to prioritise collaboration, you know, looking at ways we can really work together, which is all more about the cooperative mutual model. So the second part, building financial resilience. Well, financial resilience is all about being able to be in a position where you feel that you can cope with the everyday and also a little bit of a bump in the road. And save as you borrow as a concept has always been part of our ethos. So little and often is a great thing with savings, even if you've got a loan, which is counterintuitive to a lot of financial people that I speak to. Being an ex-banker, I always think, well, I speak to financial directors and all sorts of people who can't get the save as you borrow. For some people who aren't used to having savings, it's really, really important. Payroll is a big part of what we do. Helping individuals is the main part of it. We don't really do business lending or mortgages yet, but we keep people on track. The third, and I know I'm getting to my end of my 5 minutes, so I'm going to wrap up a little bit quickly. But the third way, how to support us, quite simply, the first thing is to join your local credit union, community bank, whatever the financial cooperative term is in your area. And bigger concept stuff is, I would love for us to be referred to much easier than we are, you know, from citizens' advice to government departments, to local government, to charities. There seems to be a reluctance to refer people to us that we might be able to help. People can't refer anymore. It's called signposting. It's all the same thing. Just get people who need us in front of us. And that's a big thing. The other big thing for me is that we're not a charity, but we're not a full commercial business. Surely we cannot pay that. Surely we should be zero rated. And the third thing is, with FCA regulations, we're regulated just like the big banks. Let me tell you that it costs, I've just paid a £5,000 audit fee for our financials. That's the same with our 2,500 members as massive, you know, massive organisations out there. And that's all to do with the pages and pages of stuff that's needed. So I think something could be done there. This time next year, I want you to be inviting me back so I can tell you the difference that we've made as part of mainstream. We should not be on the outer rim. We should be part of the mainstream. And my time's up.
Fabulous, and good to wake us all up with a lot of passion and some really practical actions, both in terms of individual members being able to join credit unions, but also local councillors on this call take note of Lauren's suggestions around how we can better signpost people to credit unions and ways we can make it financially easier to have a branch and offer services locally. So I am going to open up for Ben next, if that is still all right, Ben, and let you kick off.
Thanks for that, Lauren. Really good to see that there are some commonalities, and thanks Anna for inviting me. So similar to Lauren, I wanted to just sort of start by outlining a little bit about who we are and what we do, the way that we've reacted to the COVID crisis, and then some of the ways in which we'd like to see sort of greater political support for the sector. So London Mutual Credit Union, we're the largest credit union in London and one of the largest in the UK. But I think really one of the things which for me marks us out is slightly different from perhaps lots of others. It's just in terms of the complexity and the range of the services we provide. So we're one of a relatively small number of credit unions to offer our own current accounts, which we do completely in-house. We operate several branches which are open daily, and they have a counter service, and if you walked into them, you sort of recognize them as looking and feeling a lot like a bank branch. And also we have a mix of both community and payroll members, and I'll come on and I'll talk about that a little bit more, and perhaps we can have some questions about that. But I think that's really important because it gives us a diverse membership base between financially excluded people, very often from a range of backgrounds within our community, a combination of that, and then also our payroll deduction members who tend to be employed very often in the public sector and jobs like that. And so my role as head of business development is to help us to grow and to build on those kind of strong foundations, but as a cooperative to do that in a way that benefits our members and the wider community. So as I think has been alluded to, all credit unions by law have to serve a common bond, which is a group of people, and it can be up to 3 million potential members covering the common bond. So our common bond, we started off as Southwark Credit Union. We now serve anybody who lives or works in the London boroughs of Lambeth, Southwark, Westminster or Camden. In addition to that, all members of the UK Armed Forces, and that's actually thanks to a campaign that the Co-op Party was involved in during my previous role working for the party. So it's quite cool to be helping to follow through with that policy all the way through. And then, as I say, recent changes in FCA regulation mean that we can now cover up to 3 million people. So a really exciting thing is that we recently got approval to expand our common bond to cover anybody who works in a health or education related occupation anywhere within Greater London. And so that's really exciting for us, because I think, our longer term ambition is to be a community bank and not-for-profit bank that covers all Londoners. And as I say, our membership reflects the diversity of London in terms of having many people who are out of work or on low incomes, as well as salaried members, you know, across a whole range of roles in some of London's main NHS trusts, several local authorities, and as I say, the armed forces, and we're looking at ways that we can build relationships with higher education as well. So that's really exciting. So just to give you a sense of scale and what that looks like in terms of perhaps some of the raw numbers, we have about 40 staff in total, £19 million worth of lending last year, 35,000 members, £26 million worth of assets. And as I say, it's about a 50-50 split between payroll versus non-payroll lending. So we're not quite on the scale of CopperPot and some of the really large credit unions, and we take a lot of inspiration from them in terms of being able to offer mortgages and things like that. But at the same time, you know, there's a strong foundation there, and we're working at a scale now where actually the possibilities in terms of really demonstrating the alternative as credit unions are a viable alternative. We feel that we're at a place where actually there's a really exciting opportunity to do that there. So that's kind of where we're at the moment. But then obviously the bit that we all want to talk about is kind of how COVID has come along and you know, forced us to relook at some of our plans and look at how we deliver some of our services and do things differently. So for us, there are probably kind of, you know, I can categorize the ways in which it's affecting us in kind of four main ways. The first of which is that in some areas we're looking at quite significantly reduced demand for a lot of our services. So as I say, about 50% of our members work in the NHS, local authorities, large employers like that. And so actually they're in relatively stable employment and, you know, by and large, financially, you know, things have been relatively okay. And traditionally lending to them, so things like holiday loans, debt consolidation loans like that, traditionally that's helped to support the business and helped us to support loans to more financially excluded members. We've seen demand for those, you know, very reduced quite significantly, which affects the business. At the same time, lots of our members are seeing reductions of their income, and so that means that, you know, people sometimes, you know, when we're looking at affordability for people applying for loan, that we have to reject higher numbers of those applications. Obviously, a lot of the stuff that we've always done in terms of offering repayment holidays, we're doing a lot more of that. Increased demand for emergency loans. So at the same time as demand for kind of our larger scale loans to our salary deduction members are falling, we're seeing a lot more demand, I think, as Lauren mentioned, for you know, from members who are looking, you know, in quite serious financial circumstances and looking for relatively small amounts of money quite quickly. And that can sometimes be tricky if overall, you know, the business is in a difficult place. And so looking at how we can maintain that emergency borrowing emergency lending is really important. And then obviously there's the kind of disruption that all organisations have faced in terms of staff, in terms of, you know, moving 40 staff working, you know, quite secure, complex systems, moving them all onto home working in the space of a few weeks. So there have been challenges around that. Some of the ways that we've been supporting that, I think it's really important to point out that in terms of the repayment holidays, interest-only repayments, reducing repayments on loans, that's something that we as credit unions, like most credit unions, have always done. And so actually, in some respects, the FCA guidance that was issued is not much of a change for us. And I think, you know, thanks also to the work by ABCUL and other organisations, our staff, you know, have been treated as key workers, which means that we've actually been able to keep our branches open. And that's really important because actually lots of people in the communities we serve, they do rely on cash, they do rely on a face-to-face banking service. And so, you know, we're really pleased that we've been able to keep those branches pretty much open continually since the start of the crisis. Other ways in which we responded is introducing sort of some new products, and I just wanted to mention a couple of them. So the first is we're now offering child benefit loans, and so actually anybody, irrespective of their employment status, can actually borrow £600 from us at short notice. And the way we do that, and the way we've been able to do that despite the increased risk, is actually through the current accounts. When they open a current account and have their child benefit paid into that account, in most circumstances, we're able to say yes to them and go ahead and offer them £600, and that helps towards school uniform costs, childcare costs, and you know, in the current circumstances, actually, you know, being able to access that emergency cash actually helps people to avoid having to turn to payday and high street lenders, which can obviously be very high rates of APR there. And then the second one, we found that lots of our employed members, the ones in the NHS and no other organisations, lots of them were stopping their salary deductions, stopping their savings because they were anxious about their financial circumstances. One of the ways we're encouraging them to continue saving with us is by giving them the reassurance that if they need to, and if they end up in a situation where financially they need to draw on some money, giving them access to a guaranteed line of credit up to £2,000. So there's a bit of a two-way agreement there that if they agree to continue saving with us on a regular basis, they'll know that actually they can borrow with us if they need to, and that it's there and that they can access that immediately. So it's giving people a bit of reassurance and a bit of flexibility at a time like this. A few other bits. We've been working, with our local councils and with our salary deduction partners. It's really important for us that it's a partnership, and that actually we're not just there to provide a service to the members, but actually we're there to work together to improve the financial well-being of all of our members, who at the end of the day are their employees as well. So we administer the hardship scheme for Southwark Council. So where Southwark Council is issuing emergency grants to people in financial emergencies, that gets distributed through our branches. We've been working with Guy's and St Thomas's Hospital Charity on ways that we can support people who are shielding, and that includes projects which hopefully will be launching soon around providing support with people facing rent arrears. We've been working with Southwark Council also about the ways that we can make sure that people who are leaving care when they turn 18, supporting them to set up a bank account, because usually very often they don't necessarily have the address history or traditional forms of ID to do that. So we've worked out a process and a referral process where we can make that much more straightforward. And as I say, we've issued over £250,000 worth of payment holidays, and that's good too. So in terms of where we're at the moment, the immediate crisis is starting to ease. We're starting to see things pick up a little bit, but we know that actually for a lot of our members, it's going to be a lot more complex than that. We're looking at ways that obviously, like lots of organisations, getting employees back to work, and how we can open our branches safely and can keep them open safely. I think there's also a growing acknowledgement, obviously, that online banking is now not just an optional extra, but actually it's essential, and it's going to be the main way that many members will interact with us, which is why we're going to be, this weekend, we're shutting down for a weekend just to carry out a major upgrade of that, to bring our online banking up to in line with lots of the main high street banks. So things like fingerprint ID, SMS stations, all the things which you'd expect from a major bank, we're going to be in a position to offer from this weekend onwards. And I think that the ABCUL and the Building Society Association and our other bodies are doing great work in lobbying the government, but I think we'd be keen to see some more financial direct aid, given that the government has managed to find £16 million for rugby union and £14 million to keep zoos open. Given how vital a part credit unions are as part of the kind of the informal safety net in this country, I think actually the government needs to be taking it a lot more seriously in terms of support. So in terms of what we're looking for in terms of other types of support, I think it's really exciting. I think before the COVID struck, there was the budget, where we saw that the government's planning legislation which will expand the range of business activities that credit unions can get involved in. So that's things like hire purchase, conditional sale, insurance, things like that. In the US, the main business, that's kind of the backbone of business for credit unions in the US is car loans. And given how much kind of rip-off informal buy car credit and things like that, we think there's a real opportunity for credit unions to be providing a better alternative in those areas too. We'd like to see further relaxation of the law around common bonds. And again, this is something which we've seen recently in the US, and I think over the long term, the ambition should be to remove that kind of restriction on credit unions altogether, so that we can continue to grow. And I think more broadly, in terms of politically, where we have supporters, I think we'd be keen to see a sort of a shift in the tone of rhetoric and the way we look at credit unions. So actually, there's a greater focus on credit unions as a viable alternative to the current financial system, because I think there's a real risk and a real sort of temptation, particularly with this Conservative government, for credit unions to be pigeonholed as a bit of a niche lender or poor man's bank. And I think that social mission is a vital part of what we do. But the reality is that the way we carry that out is by having a broad membership base and actually being able to have something to offer to people from a range of different backgrounds. And so I think it's just important that when we talk and think about credit unions and advocate for credit unions, we get the tone of that right. So that's a really kind of quick overview of where we're up to and what we're doing. But hopefully we can discuss some of that a little bit more in some of the questions.
Great, thank you very much, Ben. I am going to hand promptly over to Joe in sunny Manchester. Joe, if you could tell us a little bit about number one, CopperPot, and sort of cover some of the points you wanted to raise on the call as well, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I'm Joe Moscrop. My role is Business Development Manager of number one CopperPot. Our credit union is a little bit different to the one Ben just mentioned then, in terms of we are an employment credit union. So there are two different types, there's geographical based and employment based. So we allow anybody that works for the UK police family to join our credit union. And we've got some, I know Ben mentioned it then about in terms of common bond, you're restricted in terms of who can actually join your credit union. We've got some strict wording about who can join, but it mainly affects officers, staff, all across the UK police family. We've got about 35,000 members nationwide, and we've only got about 35 members of staff that are dealing with those members. So we are very small in terms of size, but in terms of membership, we are huge and we're growing every single year. My job specifically is to raise awareness about what we do, not only as a credit union, what credit unions do, but obviously what we offer. So it's in terms of growing membership, advising about products. We do savings, loans and mortgages, and predominantly we try and encourage people to save for a rainy day. And that, I think this is across all credit unions. Try and encourage people to have that resilience, have some money in the bank that they can dip into as and when they need, when the unexpected arises. And I think this pandemic has been a key tool for us to explain that, look, things can pop up that you can't plan for, and saving through a credit union can make it so much easier just to support yourself when those things happen. And then there's loans and mortgages as well. So not many credit unions offer mortgages. We are one of very few. But we were able to actually launch our Help to Buy mortgage this year during COVID, which was very surprising. And I think this actually reflects our background as being a cooperative, where you kind of saw some of the high street banks reducing their loan to value in the mortgages. So some people were struggling to get onto the property ladder during this time. We actually increased our mortgage market, if you will. So we introduced this brand new product to try and help people get onto the property ladder. And like I said, when you saw people reducing the loan to value, we've kept ours at 90%. People can still borrow as first-time buyers. We also increased our mortgage term to 35 years as well, to allow people to have a mortgage for longer, make it more affordable for them. And we were quite pleased to be able to do this during this pandemic and doing almost the opposite of what some of the high street banks were doing. And again, this links back to the idea that we're all not for profit. The idea is we do want to support people on a day-to-day basis with their financial needs, as opposed to making money and pleasing shareholders. And that's what everything that we say in all of these calls, it comes down to that. So our purpose is just to make sure that people are looked after, people have support, they have the products that they need to get by a daily basis. So we were quite pleased to do that. In terms of furlough, the furlough scheme, COVID and everything that has come up this year unexpectedly, we were affected a little bit different to community banks and credit unions, simply because we are for the police family. They weren't furloughed. So most of our membership did continue to work throughout it. So in terms of being put on the furlough scheme, loss of income, we weren't directly affected as much as others may have been. However, we saw a bit of a knock-on effect from partners. So it might be someone in their household were put on the furlough scheme, lost a job, anything like that. So it's kind of affected people through that. And what I was pleased to see in terms of our team and our staffing is when a member was struggling, if they were struggling with payments through a mortgage or a loan, all they needed to do is get into contact. They needed to call the office. They were put in contact with someone who would deal with that, deal with their issue, help them as best as possible, whether that was a payment break, whether that was reducing interest, anything like that. And I think a lot of people expected to have to jump through hoops to get that kind of assistance. And again, I think it reiterated the fact that we are not for profit. We are literally here as people helping people. and when people actually need us. I think those are the kind of circumstances when people realise what we're truly about. So throughout this, we have helped a lot of people through that, as well as launching new products as well. In terms of going forward, I think we'll see a bit of an impact when the furlough scheme ends, as we're not too sure what that's going to look like just yet. But again, it is just about offering products that people need, helping people, that education piece as well of what credit unions do. I think it does link quite nicely as well with what a few people have mentioned on this call in general, and what we can do from a legislative point of view, and the cooperative party, how it can help. And this links a lot with my role as well. I think education is key. I think a lot of it comes down to education of managing your own finances. It's not something that I was taught in schools, and as part of my role, I bring that out into the community, and I try and teach people about managing money, teaching the basics of that to put them into a good position to go forward in life. And it's also education of what's available as well, and raising awareness of building societies, of credit unions, of community banks, and all of the above, letting people know that there are other options. And although I work for a police credit union, if I come across somebody who is struggling, who doesn't work for the police, I will say, well, have you heard of your local credit union? Why not look at them? Because this is what we're about. They will help. They are about people helping people, not about making profit. So I think that's quite a broad topic, but just education, I think, is key. And whether that's yourself joining, I think Lauren made a really good point before about the best thing that you can do is join yourselves and actually understand what it's like. And I'm sure you'll get great service from your local credit unions, or you work in employment credit unions as well, but it's telling others as well. So I think that's a big piece of what we could do. And I think that covers it, really. As you can tell, I'm quite passionate about the people helping people aspect, and I think that is the key thing that links us all together. And in terms of offering people what they want and helping them financially, that is what made credit unions and building societies stand out.
Great, thank you so much, Jo. And I think that's probably why a lot of us sort of got involved in the cooperative movement, is that idea that we can have a system which is about helping people out rather than about sort of extracting profit and sort of taking for yourself. So I'm sure your sentiments are echoed. I've been following the chat in the Zoom group chat, which has been great, and lots of really supportive comments for all of your contributions. So last but by no means least, I'm going to bring in Karen. ABCUL do an amazing role in representing the credit union movement, lobbying for some of the changes in law that's needed. There's some of the rules and regulations surrounding the sector are hugely outdated, and ABCUL do a very valiant job in trying to make sure that as many people as possible can access the kind of great services that Jo, Lauren and Ben have talked to. So I'll hand over Karen, and then we'll open it up for questions, and I might mention some of the comments that have been in the chat as well.
Great, thank you, Anna. Thank you for that introduction as well, that was so nice. Yeah, so hello everyone from a very, very rainy Glasgow today. As Anna says, I work for ABCUL, we're the Association of British Credit Unions. We work with about 2/3 of credit unions in England, Scotland and Wales. We don't actually, as Anna said earlier, we don't actually have any members in Northern Ireland. So if you're coming from a Northern Irish perspective, apologies, I don't really have any wisdom on that. We're a trade association. We obviously do a lot of work to support our members through some of the challenges that they face, but and particularly in my role, I work in the policy team, so we sort of work with our members to establish what the priorities ought to be. We work with people like yourselves who hopefully share our vision of a strong kind of ethical alternative financial services sector, and we're really happy to to be invited to participate in this, but also to hopefully continue that relationship moving forward. So I fear I have more notes here than the 5 to 7 minutes that Anna gave me, so apologies. I'll try and be relatively brief. Much of what has been said so far I would absolutely agree with, and I was going to make a number of those points myself. Just to firstly start on the impact of COVID, we've been having weekly all-member meetings since week 1 of lockdown, and we do those twice a week. We have been doing since the middle of March, and we get about 100 people on those every week, and they've been a really good opportunity to hear the experiences of our members to, my battery is going to die obviously, and we've also been gathering data as best we can to understand what's happening in the sector. Some of the key themes which have already been touched on, obviously the initial phase of the first month or 6 weeks or so was particularly challenging, as it was for everyone. There was a lot of logistical challenges in terms of you know, the sector, as Ben says, was allowed to keep open as to continue as a sort of key financial service, but nevertheless it meant changing hugely in terms of keeping the staff and volunteers of credit unions safe, and obviously the members safe as well. Moving online, I think everyone on the call today probably already had an online offering. Some credit unions, I think all credit unions were considering it, but some hadn't gone very far down that journey, and they've had to move more quickly than they anticipated. There was certainly adjusting to some regulatory expectations. The FCA's announcements on payment holidays and so forth, for the most part, didn't apply to credit unions, but it certainly created a different expectations from what had been amongst consumers. And you know, as many people said, the sector just wants to do the right thing by its members, irrespective of what that means for balancing the books and so on. The two key themes probably would be, in the first 6 weeks, the complete drop in lending. I'm not going to put a figure on it because there was quite a lot of variation. Some credit unions, particularly those serving particular sectors, weren't affected so much. Some would tell me they hadn't done a loan in weeks. And another one which surprised us a wee bit, but I think is fairly typical, is savings increased a huge amount during this period. I think possibly people didn't have a lot of money, didn't have anything to spend their money on, but also there was a sort of I think people were nervous and maybe weren't, you know, getting those new kitchens and those new cars that they've been saving for some time. So, I mean, that's obviously a positive to some extent. Although for a credit union, if you know a bit about how they balance their books, a complete drop in lending and an increase in savings.
Have we lost Karen altogether? In which case, Joel, if you could drop Karen a note just to see if she needs a hand getting back into the meeting. And I might open it up to questions for Joe, Lauren and Ben while we wait for Karen to come back. There's been a couple in the chat and I've enjoyed following that, but also you can use the hands up function if you'd like to ask a question. I think Valerie has been our most enthusiastic credit union supporter in the chat, and also had some questions around sort of different functionality of credit unions, so how you open an account and what the difference in availability means in different areas of the country. Valerie, did you want to ask a question? I've unmuted you. No, that is fine. So Valerie's comment was, as well as applauding everyone's enthusiasm, saying that advising how you open a credit union in different parts of the country, where the kind of functionality and services on offer are different. There have been a few other comments where people have looked for their local credit union and struggled a bit to find one. So if any of the three of you had advice on how to easily access services, the best way to get signposted over, that would be great to start. And then Neil wanted to make a comment on community wealth building, I believe. Neil Wilson, I will unmute you. Neil, it's not letting me.
Can you hear me?
Yes, there we are.
I'm on
Hi,
such
Neil.
sophisticated thing. You've heard before on this Wednesday lunchtime about the from Newham's Mayor. I'm Newham Council, so I don't want to spend too long on the community wealth building agenda. But we do have, and I double checked before I put this out there that it's still on the website, okay? And MoneyWorks, which we set up, is part of that community wealth building that Roxana talked about. But it is, basically in a, the deprivation figures that we've talked about ad nauseum sometimes about Newham or Tower Hamlets, and the London Community Credit Union, which covers Hackney, Tower Hamlets, Newham, I'm a proud member of, and I was part of setting up NewCred, which has now been amalgamated. I'm a keen loan person at the moment myself, as well as a shareholder or whatever saver. So I believe in the credit union system, but I think it's important that we do have such, if we can, within areas of such financial constraint, particularly with COVID, support to the residents who are struggling, so that it's available on the website, or councillors know all about it, and that, you know, the signposting is done, because I think word of mouth, even with technology, is so important. And if we can lead by example. The previous mayor, Robin Wales, was like setting it up with me, and you know, Roxana and all the councillors are, you know, keen on it. And it's about saying it's not just a poor person's bank; it is about an alternative which has got ethical principles. You know? So I just wanted to come in on that, you know. So I just double checked before I claimed
No, that's
wonderful
great.
things that
And
are
if
still
there's
there on the website, Anna, because I thought it's probably
perfect.
taken off.
No, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
And before I open back up, we've got Karen back. So I will let her finish her talk in just a second. Charles Sim has said that party members are part of the common bond of the co-op credit union if there is no local one. So a sort of a practical answer for those of you struggling to find one in your local area, and lots of agreement with Neil's comments too. Joe, Lauren or Ben, did you have any comments on Neil or some of the practicalities that Valerie raises before I let Karen back? You'll need, if just unmute yourself if you want to chip in if you're a speaker.
Yeah, just to say, oh.
Go on, Ben.
Ben, then Lauren.
Just to say on the practical question of how to find your local credit union, there's a really great website which ABCUL runs, which is findyourcreditunion.co.uk. I think it's the one. And based on that, you know, you can enter both your employer's postcode and your home postcode, and it will come back with some credit unions that you're likely to be a member of. I think the wider point about the kind of there being huge discrepancies across the country in terms of, you know, the range of services that different credit unions are able to provide, I think is a really important one. And I think it's an interesting challenge for the sector about how we stay locally based and accountable to local people, whilst at the same time looking at ways that, you know, perhaps one route is like in the US, where credit union service organizations, where credit unions stay relatively small and local, but where they work together to pool overheads and joint services, things like marketing, HR, IT, all those kind of overhead costs. And so that's an interesting route which has worked in other countries, which I think, you know, is an interesting one to explore in the UK, certainly.
Great. I think if it's all right, I'll hop back to Karen. Let you finish what you were chatting about, but if you could also add in there's sort of some queries about how people, you know, can some of the practicalities of joining ones, or where there are gaps in provision in parts of the country, where you might want to signpost them to would be great. And then Neil made a comment, I think you joined halfway through, around the role of credit unions and community banking and mutual forms of finance in community wealth building, and the important role that councils can play in promoting them, not just as a sort of last resort for people on low incomes, but for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Just firstly, my apologies for that. It had to happen once in this lockdown period, and this is the first time. So apologies if it was this meeting. Yeah, just what Ben says, there's a website called findyourcreditunion.org, I think it is, where you can put in some details, and it should give you a list of credit unions you would be eligible to join. I think there is coverage throughout the country, although obviously there'll be some areas where you'd be better, more well served than others. And yeah, this sort of the local councils, as Lauren says, we want to be seen as a you know, a partner, just as not as a last resort, but as something that's you know, relevant to all employees of councils and you know, and to the communities that they're serving as well. Just to sort of take up where I was just sort of speaking a bit about the initial impact of COVID. We've moved on for those initial stages as you'd expect. We're sort of adjusting, as everyone is, I think, probably trying to work out what is the permanent changes, and to some respects what's going to get worse. And we're very aware of the impact of the job retention scheme and those kind of things. In fact, we're already seeing some of those challenges from that being on the end of that being on the horizon. Obviously there's some things that are particular to this summer. I think nobody's going on a holiday you know, but I don't know if that'll be a permanent thing. Those sort of things will presumably resume to some extent. We're at about, probably I was put an average of about 60% in terms of where we thought we'd be in terms of lending, which is obviously recovered somewhat, but it's not quite like where we would want to be. As Ben and some other speakers have mentioned, there's been a huge amount of innovation in terms of new products and that sort of thing. So credit unions are really looking at you know, how they can continue to meet members' needs, but in a different way, and how those needs have changed and how they can continue to be relevant. In terms of moving forward, so 1 week before lockdown commenced, we launched ABCUL's 2025 vision. We've been working on this project for about a year. We had a number of town hall events, and we consulted widely with the sector, not just within our own membership. And we put together a 5-year vision for the sector that basically set out a kind of ambitious vision of what we wanted from the credit union sector. And I'm not going to go through it all, but for example, we envisaged that in 5 years' time that it'll be a sort of digital first sector. It's not that we won't be doing the rest, but nevertheless there will be an expectation, as seems to be the case with banks, that that's the sort of main way most people will want to engage in their financial services. We're also looking to build marketing skills throughout the sector to really learn how to promote ourselves, and also, as Lauren mentioned, better collaboration, not just because it's the right thing to do, but also because to get the scale that we need to be able to get, you know, offer technology. And as I mentioned, I think earlier, of CUSOs, or credit union service organisations, which is different organisations working together to bring in products. So we launched that in the middle of March. We think that's not only still important, but actually the last few months has taught us it is even more important than it was. You know, technology. I've seen some evidence, some research by YouGov that was published a few weeks ago that said, as a result of the recent few months, 64% of people that they asked only wanted to work with recognised providers, which is understandable because I think the society certainly feels less secure, but we really need to tackle that and get the message across that credit unions are safe and they're relevant and they're here for everyone, really. In terms of some of my asks, I mean, I would absolutely reiterate, sort of agree with everything that's been shared today. The government announced in the budget announcement in March that they would look to reform the Credit Unions Act, which has been our main wellbeing priority for some years. So those discussions are taking place, as Ben's so well described. If we look at the credit union sector here, it basically only does savings and loans, because that's currently, with give or take a few exceptions, that's all we're allowed to do under that act. If we look to America, for example, only a tiny fraction of what they do is savings and loans, and we really want to be in that place. So those discussions are ongoing. I don't know if it will result in primary legislation, but I hope that your co-op colleagues in Parliament will support that if and when it comes through. We certainly want to have a conversation about the role credit unions can play in economic recovery. We've got a huge amount of money that we want to lend. There's clearly need. I think that the environment in which now operate is even more complicated than other in terms of affordability and that kind of thing. So we'd certainly welcome a conversation with the government about, you know, is there a role for underwriting or something like that to help us help the people that we want to. And also, and a few people have mentioned the role, or, you know, just in terms of joining a credit union or being an advocate locally, and I'd absolutely agree with that. What I would just add to it is one thing that's particularly important to most credit unions is the role of employers. Many credit unions, as Joe does, works with an employer. It's not just, you know, if you're a credit union, it's not that you're one or the other. I think probably now most credit unions want to have that relationship. So, you know, if your place of work, or if you're on the board somewhere or something like that, certainly make sure that they offer credit union payroll savings schemes to their staff, even if it's not for, you know, you don't see any immediate benefit to yourself. It will be there hopefully for any future staff or anybody in that organisation who could benefit from it. And it's a really great way of saving and borrowing when you need to. And yes, thanks again and apologies for my little technical hiccup.
No, thank you very much for coming back and joining us. And as well as asking your workplace, there was a good suggestion from Brian Eden in the chat around if you're a union workplace rep, you could also have a great role to play in your workplace and with your fellow union members in encouraging people to join and signposting the service. So thanks for that one, Brian. I've got a hand up from Mary Fee, and I've got a question from Cynthia around credit unions' online abilities and sort of the shift towards digital. So Mary, I will unmute you first. I think I heard a rustle, but I can't. You're unmuted. Mary? No, no problem. I will go straight to Cynthia. Technology is failing us today, but Cynthia, we had a question about online banking.
Yes, just a very, very simple question, but from experience of a voluntary group where we try to support people who are vulnerable and also deliver some computer classes, and reaching a section of the population to get them online is really difficult. So just wondered about the assumption that everybody can get online.
Great, thank you. And I had a question from Simon Curry, but I think he's left, but I thought it was quite an interesting one. So I'm just checking in the chat for it. I may have to come back to it. Sorry, I will let you guys talk about digital briefly while I find this question. But please, yeah, should we start with Ben, as we you touched on online services in part of your presentation?
Sure. I think that, you know, in the conversation about credit unions and banks going online, I think that the question of motivation is a really important one. So the large banks predominantly see going online as a way to cut costs and a way to reduce branches. And as profit-led organizations, they're understandably in a hurry to do that in order to grow their bottom lines. And so you're seeing them not so much asking as pushing their members, including vulnerable, their customers, including vulnerable customers, to use those tools. And it's being very much presented to them as a fait accompli. I think the way we see it is very different to that, in that for us, digital is part of the service, and it's part of our efforts to provide a better range of services and options to our members. But for us, I mean, I think, you know, we're very realistic, and I think, you know, a lot more honest perhaps than the banks about this, in terms of, you know, we're proud to have branches. We're going to continue to have branches. You know, when opportunities arise, we want to expand the number of branches. But I think actually, you know, we recognise that actually probably for over time, the number of members who are using online banking to interact with us day to day, that's going to increase, and we want to support as many members who are willing and able to do that. So as I mentioned, we're doing a big upgrade this weekend, but that's going to be followed by a big push over the next couple of months, where we're going to be running events in our branches insofar as that's possible with social distancing. We're going to be doing Zoom chats like this. We're going to be offering one-to-one appointments so that anybody who wants to make the step to digital banking can. But we're going to be combining that with also using digital tools to actually make it easier, so that when people contact us via email or phone us or come into a branch, they can get that face-to-face service. So actually, we don't see digital as a way of replacing face-to-face services. In many cases, we see it as a way of enhancing it. And so we're fully committed to all of our branches. And actually, I think there's an opportunity for those branches to evolve over time and become much less places where you go for day-to-day banking for most people. And actually thinking about what does the branch of the future look like, in terms of, could it be more like a financial well-being hub? So a bit more like going to your local gym. You know, could these be places where we run events, where we do seminars, where you do training, where actually people who have got financial issues and want to know more about how they can manage their money better, how can we make it into places where those sorts of conversations are happening, whilst at the, you know, and at the same time, you know, for those people who really do rely on face-to-face banking, that's available for them. So I think the question of motivation here is a really important one. And I think, you know, in a way, credit unions, you know, it's baked into our model to actually, you know, I think to a degree this shift is inevitable, but how we go about doing that shift, how quickly that shift happens, and how it affects people is really important.
Great. And I guess sort of the other end of the spectrum, where Lauren, in Northumberland, you're operating at a sort of a smaller organisation than London Mutual. There are presumably particular challenges that come with going digital, but also opportunities as well. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to mention.
Yeah, well, really, when we got involved with Northumberland, we realised that to be viable, we had to cut costs, and that's where the automation and the digitalisation comes in. We're not really not wanting to speak to our members or meet them or converse with them. It's not about that. It's about making the mundane go through automated. So, you know, things like requesting a withdrawal of your monies doesn't need a person to do that. Generally speaking, that can be done automated. So it's just getting that right balance. But Northumberland is such a geographically, you know, a disparate county that there's no way we could have branches all over. So we, for example, are looking at instigating a current account, a debit card account, where our members can use the post office, and I think the post office network is really, really important to support it, and also to keep that cash flow going as well for those that need it. So technology plays a major part in our plan because it has to for us to survive.
Great, thank you. And anything you wanted to add, Joe? Perhaps next, and then Karen, maybe you can help us sum up, given you've got this big picture overview of the sector, if that sounds okay.
Yeah, just a quick one to add on that, because we are quite different, given the fact that we've got the one office and 35,000 members nationwide. We kind of started the opposite in that we're predominantly digital. People join online, they do the business online, rather than joining face-to-face and joining in branch. Our branch footfall is minor. However, myself and my marketing team, we will travel to police forces around the UK and have that face-to-face interaction. So it could be that somebody does hear about us at work and joins at work through a paper method, and then we'll then bring that back to the office. And although most of our members do like that digital service because it's speedier, it's more efficient for the credit union, it's helpful, can get decisions back to you faster. If there is somebody who doesn't like technology, they haven't got access to it or anything like that, they can still pick up the phone. We are there at the other end. We will make it work, whether that's a mortgage application, a loan application. We are still there to see the whole process through. So we don't try to exclude anybody. There's usually some kind of method that would suit everybody within our membership base.
Great, and then I'll hand over to Karen to wrap up. There have been lots of questions put in the chat and really interesting comments around how we have credit unions that meet the needs of Muslim customers, for example, and interest-free products, around how we can engage voluntary action networks in referrals. So I think I might make sure I've saved the chat and perhaps circulate to you all, and we could do a bit of a written follow-up as well. So I'll hand over to you, Karen.
Yeah, I mean, just to say on that, if anyone does want to, I'm sorry, I've not really been monitoring the chat, but if anyone does want to get in touch if any specific questions, or even if you're just looking for a credit union, I'm sure Anna can provide my email address. I'm happy to hear. I mean, I think there's been quite a lot of agreement from all the speakers just in terms of how they see the credit union sector going, which is that we're extremely ambitious. We want to be doing more of what we do. We want to be more, relevant to all of people's financial lives. We want, people they don't just have lending and savings needs, they have a need for current accounts, which, London Mutual does, although it's not typical, and also, insurance needs and all these kind of things. And that's the place that we really want to be in. So we would, really want a sort of a fair regulatory system to enable us to do that, but also just we're sort of dependent on everyone's support in terms of being an advocate for the sector and for promoting what we do in your own communities and your own throughout your own connections and that sort of thing, and your networks. So I'm absolutely happy to have any conversations on the back of that with anyone, and yeah, thanks again for having us along today.
Fabulous. So I'll see you all next week, where we're going to be talking about a cooperative Green New Deal. I'll signpost you to party.coop/owning the future if you would like to read today's chapter on an alternative financial services. There'll be no credit union suggestions in there that aren't a surprise to Karen, as we work closely with ABCUL and make sure that we're aligning what our politicians are doing, both in local government and Westminster, Scotland and Wales, with some of the needs of the sector, and ABCUL certainly have their ear to the ground on that, as well as working with individual credit unions. So please do engage, get involved locally. do as everybody has said, and join your credit union if not a member already. If you're a councillor, there are loads of things you can do, and there's a guide that was put together a few years ago now about local government credit unions as well, which is available on our website. If you can't find it, drop me a line on policy@party.coop. And with that, I will see you next week. Thank you very much for joining, and look after yourselves.